Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's virtual event featuring Macallan and Highland Park Whiskies. My name is Shannon, and I'm a part of the New Hampshire Liquor and Wine Outlet social team. We have a super exciting event for you tonight as part of our 90 Days Around the World promotion. So far we've taken you all over the world to various different wineries and distilleries, and we've met some of the industry's biggest brand names. Tonight we find ourselves with Macallan and Highland Park Whiskies. I am joined by three experts tonight. We have Jeremy Fonicello, the Macallan Ambassador, as well as Martin, I'm going to try my best. Is it Markvardsen?
Markvardsen, but you're doing well, Shannon.
Okay, great. And he is the Senior Ambassador for Highland Park, as well as Mark Roy from our New Hampshire Liquor and Wine Outlet Spirits marketing team. Jeremy and Martin each have their own exciting programs to walk us through tonight. I am here to share any questions with them that you may have throughout the event. So please be sure to leave those in the comment section on Zoom or on Facebook. Mark is here to answer all of your questions regarding inventory or availability, so please leave those questions as well. And for those of you that have pre-registered tonight, we'll be giving away two $250 gift cards to the New Hampshire Liquor and Wine Outlets. So in addition to the gift card, each winner is also going to be receiving a set of Macallan and Highland Park glasses. So winners are going to be chosen at random tonight. So make sure you're submitting your best questions for our brands, and we're going to announce winners later in our program. So with that, I will pass it off to you, Martin, to get started. What can you tell us about Highland Park?
Well, thank you very much, Shannon, and welcome to everyone. And again, thanks for having me. Well, first of all, Highland Park is located in a group of islands called the Orkney Islands, which makes Highland Park the northernmost Scottish distillery in the world. So we are quite unique. We are 420 meters more north than Scapa. So by far, we are the northernmost distillery in Scotland. We are quite unique because we're one of the oldest distillery as well. So going way back, founded in 1798 by a man called Magnus, which was a descendant from the Vikings that used to live in Orkney, and going all the way back to that, in the year about 850, the Vikings from Norway and Denmark came to Orkney, settled down, and took over the islands and lived there for many years. And some will actually say they still do, as 1 out of 3 people living in Orkney can still trace their DNA, their bloodline straight back to the Vikings. So there's this Nordic heritage, this beautiful kind of vibe about history up there as well. And when it comes to Highland Park, as I said, we are one of the oldest, and we are one of the last remaining distilleries in Scotland still to do the old traditional way of floor malting. That means the way we are making our whiskey is quite unique. There's today about 130 distilleries producing whiskey in Scotland, and just about a handful of distilleries are still doing the old traditional way of floor malting. So very, very unique. So location, our traditional way of floor malting, and very important, our peat to create the beautiful smoke in our whiskey is unique. And then of course the cask and so on. So I'll try to take you through some of these things as we go along for the next half an hour or so. So to start with our location, as I mentioned before, Orkney. For those of you that have no idea where Orkney is, I'm going to do this is PowerPoint presentation in Orkney. That's how old-fashioned we are. But here we have Scotland, and way up north there we have the Orkney Islands. And this is how the Orkney Islands looks like. You can see that. 70 islands, and we have on one side the North Sea, and on the other side the Atlantic Ocean. And if you can imagine, there's a fight between the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. If they have to meet to fight with wind, that will happen in Orkney. And that's one of the reasons the temperatures, the climate the scenery there is very, very different from the rest of Scotland, which makes a huge impact in how our whiskey is going to be matured and how our final product will be as well. And one of the things you will see, or let me rephrase that, one of the things you won't see if you ever make it to Orkney, that will be that there's no trees. There's absolutely no trees in Orkney, and that's one of the reasons that when we cut our Acadian peat, it will taste different than the rest of Scotland, because peat from the rest of Scotland will contain traces 3,000-4,000 years back of wood, trees, seaweed, and so on. But in our peat, no trees. So beside that, our location unique in the way where 70 islands, but only 21 of them have people living on them. And we normally say, if you talk to people and we have to explain them about Orkney, there's two different ways you have to explain it. Officially, there are 70 islands, whereof 21 are inhabited. But if you measure it the old traditional way, like the Acadians do, there's in fact only this year 46 islands in Orkney. 2 years ago there was 43, and if you go back to 2014 there was only 38 islands. And it's the way they measure it, which is very historical. An island in Orkney is only an island if a sheep can live there without human interference for more than a year. That's how they measure it. And that means if there's grass enough to feed a sheep on the island, then it's an island. If they come back after a year and the sheep is dead, it's a stone in the water. So it's changed every second year when they measure it. And that's the old way of doing it, going all the way back to the Vikings. If any one of you sits out there and have been to Orkney, you will probably agree with me that it's very windy. That also means that it's not easy to get to Orkney. There's every day 3 flights from Aberdeen, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Inverness, but every third flight will be cancelled due to the wind. So you might never get there, and if you do, you might never leave, which, to be honest, is not too bad. If you take the ferry, every second to third ferry will be cancelled due to the wind as well. So it's kind of a tricky place to go to. I understand I'm not selling it very well, but let me just say it's very, very beautiful up there. When it comes to our distillery and this will be cut about 5 miles from the distillery called Hobbystow Moor. That's where we cut this peat. This is about 3,000 to 4,000 years old, the peat we cut. We can find traces of this down to 9,000 years old. But what we do is we're cutting down to 3-4 meters. And as our peat only grows with 1 millimeter per year, we actually cut down to 3,000 to 4,000 years. And that's where we get this beautiful kind of earth out. We cut about 300 ton per year, and that will create the smoke you will get in Highland Park later on. So what we're actually doing, we take the barley in, we steep it into water for about 2.5 days. We then drain it from water, put it out on this beautiful concrete floor we have, where the germination really starts. And during that period of time, we have to turn it around for 7 days. Every 6 hours for the next 7 days. This is a very, very hard job. And I can tell you, this was the first job I had at Highland Park way back. I was told when I came up to Highland Park that our manager at that time, a man called Russell Anderson, had no humor at all. He was called Scotland's driest man, and he had no humor. And he told me that, you have to do the floor malting for the first 7 days you're here to learn the beginning of whiskey making. And it's very hard for you, so remember to drink a lot. And in my head, I had a picture of a huge bottle of water. In his hand, he had a bottle of a 12-year-old Highland Park. And he said, drink this the next 8 hours and you will not be sore in your arms and back tomorrow. And I believed him. Bad mistake, I can tell you. Hard work, strong alcohol, not good at all. But what we have after 7 days, I can tell you, is what we call green malt. If we leave that on the floor, it will just start eating its own sugar and become a straw. To stop that germination, we have to heat it up. And this is where peat comes in. The peat will start drying the green malt when we fire up in the kiln underneath the green malt, which is now on a metal floor with lots of holes in it. The smoke starts vapor up to this green malt, and the smoke finds its way into the grain and goes in and sit there where we normally have starch, which is now turning into malt, and gives us this beautiful smoke. After about 10-12 hours, we change to coke and coal and dry it completely. When it's crushed and we add water to it, this smoky flavor will sit there. And already in our wash, when we make the fermentation there, you'll be able to smell this beautiful sweet smoke that Highland Park is known for. So we make our wash, this beautiful strong beer at 8.5%. We distill it, and we distill up to about 70% alcohol and put it into our oak casks. And I know that Jeremy will probably take you through the story of oak as well, but it's kind of the same wood story, and as Macallan and Highland Park, we have together as with the same owner. But it's where most of the flavors come from. About 60 to 80% of the flavors will come, probably a little bit more from Macallan because they're not using peat. But the cask is essential for our whiskey. And when it comes to Highland Park and Macallan, we stand for the biggest proportion of sherry casks in the industry. So if you look at our portfolio, of our core range portfolio, it's all about sherry casks. And this is where we get some of the beautiful sweet flavor, some of the fruity flavor. It's where we get 100% of the natural color as well. And then we do one more thing, which is one of our pillars as well. We do what we call cask harmonization. And cask harmonization is simply where our whiskey maker, Gordon Motion, he finds the cask to create the 12-year-old or the 18-year-old or whatever it can be. And when he found all the cask that will make that flavor we need for the 12 and 18, he would gather all these casks together again, or the liquid from the cask, in what we call cask harmonization, a marrying period for all the whiskey to find each other. So it will always be the complexity you're looking for and the consistency you're looking for. That's the way. So I'm not sure how many people have been to Orkney, but I'm pretty sure most of you have tasted, or I hope have tasted, Highland Park before. But I'm gonna go through a few whiskies with you. I'm not sure you have them in front of you, but no matter what you have in front, just think Highland Park. So the first one I'm going to introduce you to is a 12-year-old. See, a 12-year-old has been matured in European oak sherry cask predominantly. We launched that in 1978, and took 20 years before we actually launched the next one, the 18-year-old, in our core range. But in 1978, the 12-year-old came out. It hasn't changed much over the years. What have changed is, of course, the age of cask we've been using over the years. In 1978, we could use 30-year-old cask if we wanted. Today, it's about 12 to 14 years old. So there's a little bit about the finish that has changed, but it's still a lovely dram. As I said, 100% natural color. And one of the things you always find with Highland Park, when you when you nose it, is the sweetness. The sweetness always comes out. There's a lot of fruitiness as well appearing. And then there's this sweet smoke at the end, which comes from a peat. So when we try it, there's the sweetness again, but then the smoke kind of kicks in on the side of your mouth. So, there's one thing we always need to talk about when we talk about whiskey, and I think Jeremy will agree, and that's the color. I always say that the color, when you look at a whiskey like this, the color is very, very important because it tells us absolutely nothing. And the reason I'm saying that is because 130 distilleries, and most of them will actually add artificial color to the whiskey, but that's not what Highland Park and Macallan does. We rely on the cask to give us the color, and when we know that that it's natural color, then the color can give you a hint. And the darker it is, the more chance for European oak sherry cask. The paler it is, more chance for American oak or refill cask. So the color can tell us something when we know it's the natural color. I'm also going to take you through a very special whiskey, our 18-year-old. And our 18-year-old is one of the most award-winning whiskeys on the market. 2 times won the best spirit in the world award. 5 times the wine and spirit competition award. So whiskey that is so complex, so beautiful, and so balanced when you taste it. And it's even for our competitors out there, or our colleagues, as I like to say, it's a whiskey that everyone prefers either to put their whiskeys up against or to enjoy a lot. I also know that Mark has behind him on the shelf some really, really good whiskeys. There's a 1968, is that right? You still have that on the shelves in the store? Yeah, 1,550 bottles, only made out of 7 casks or 7 hogshead and one butt, all refill. One of the best Highland Parks I ever tried. And I think there's only 1 bottle left in the store. There's a bottle named after one of my very good friends, Søren Solskjaer, very famous photographer, an absolutely amazing and very rare bottle as well. And you even have a few of the 25-year-olds. So there's a lot of different Highland Parks in the store you have to go for, which are amazing. But besides at 12 and 18, we also have things like Valkyrie, Valknut, and Valfather. A series we made to talk about the Viking legends. A series where we also make a little bit more smoky and peated whiskey, where Valkyrie is matured with 3 different kind of casks. We have Valknut with 2 different kind of casks, and we have Valfather 100% refill cask. But the smoke level is increasing for each of them and will end up at 47% as well. So definitely something that's worth to try as well. So a lot of great Highland Parks on the shelves in New Hampshire. And Shannon, any questions coming in for me?
Yes, we do actually. We have a few regarding, excuse me, the peat specifically. So yes. So someone actually wanted to know what it was exactly. What is peat?
Good. Well, peat is plants, grass, not for Orkney, it's not trees, but plants, trees, heather decomposed through thousands of years, and will become, it was what the houses used to being heated up by in the older days. It was the fuel people had to make fire, especially on Orkney where there was no trees. And of course, that's where you get the smoky flavor from. So if if you go around Scotland and you go down to Islay, for instance, where Ardbeg, Lagavulin, Bowmore, and so on will be Lafroig as well, the peat there will be different. It will contain much more wood. It will contain a little bit more seaweed than on Orkney, and it will change as you go up north in Scotland. So peat is not just peat when we talk about flavors. Peat is made the same way, but it will take up to 3,000–4,000 years at least to make the peat. And as I said to begin with, our peat in Orkney grows with 1 millimeter. So when we cut down to 3 meters, we can come back in 3,000 years and cut peat again. Or my colleagues in the future can. I'm surely not hoping I will do it, but 3,000 years it will take to become this again. So decomposed plants over 3,000 to 4,000 years.
So that was actually a great segue, because Paul on our Zoom chat also asked if there was an infinite supply of peat, and it sounds like there's not. Maybe in 3,000 years.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, and one of the things that that we do in Orkney and at Highland Park, we have tried over the last couple of years to use less peat, finding a different way to burn the peat, but to give the same amount of smoke. And you can do that by slow down for the heats, make it burn a little bit slower, so it's not flames you see, but just kind of it gristle there. And we are allowed to cut 300 ton per year, but for the last couple of years, we actually just cut it about 120 ton per year or something like that, and giving the same result. So if we look at Hoppister, where we have our peat today, to cut the same quality and the same amount for the next couple of years, we will probably have peat enough for the next 80 to 90 years. But we do own the rights to the peat on the other side of the road. But we can't start cutting there because that's the reservation for the birds today, until we run dry at Hoppister. But then we can slowly move over there and probably cut for the next 2,000 years or so, and then we can go back to Hoppister. But Hoppister, where we cut peat today, is where Magnus Jørgensen cut peat back in 1798. So it's the same peat we use today as he did in 1798.
So we have another question similar to production and peat in general, but Josh is asking, do you use the barley that's actually grown on the island?
Well, Josh, very good question. And the answer is no. Barley can't grow in Orkney due to the wind, or at least not enough barley for us. So what we do get the barley from the mainland. We're using a variety of barley today called Laurette, and that is grown basically down south in Scotland or north of England. And we are malting in Highland Park around 20 to 25% ourselves. The rest will come from a malting called Simpsons. And that means that we have to get it. Laurette, Concerto, and all these variety of barley can't grow in Orkney because of the climate. But when we made Valknut, for instance, in the Viking Legend series, we were using a bit of local barley, a local barley called tartan. Tartan is a very short straw, very hard to grow, and we use that to make some whiskey for about 5–6 years, but only a very small proportion of it that could give us just enough for 5 weeks production. So we have used local barley, but only in a very, very small scale and only for a few of the special editions. Good. Any more questions, Shannon?
Yeah, one more before I kick it back over to you. So Anne in our Zoom chat was asking how you determine what cask to use.
Yeah, well, our master whiskey maker, he works daily on controlling casks. So there's a few different ways to look at it. If he's going to make a 12-year-old, he will require samples sent down from the distillery in bottles like this, coming down in samples like this. And he will then nose the cask, about 300 casks per day, nosing them to see if they're good enough, select them in by ages, and then he will collect or select the cask samples that will make the 12-year-old. The same for the 18 and so on. So when we fill a cask in Orkney with a new make spirit, from the beginning, we have no idea if it's going to be a 12-year-old, an 18-year-old, or even a 50-year-old. That will be selected during the maturation process or the years by Gordon motion. Then there's, of course, the selection for single casks, which I know you have one as well in store, a beautiful one. I was there when it was selected. And that's a different process because there we're going for the best of the best cask all the time, where we have to go for a selection of casks that will create flavors for the 12 and 18-year-old. So there's a different way to select on the day we are working, but it's a process that takes quite a long time, where we start very early in the morning, around 7:30 in the morning, black coffee, going in, starting the nosing, and at the end of the day, we might have gone through all of them and selected the about 100 casks for the 12-year-old and the 100 casks for the 18-year-old, and a few casks that was good enough for or to become a single cask, which is always something unique. So yeah, good.
Great. So let's see, we've got another question from Norman, talking about the Spey River is famous for whiskey. What river near Orkney is used for the water, and how does it compare to the River Spey?
Well, Norman, good afternoon or good morning or whatever it is there. There's no real rivers in Orkney, but we do get the water from a spring. When Highland Park was founded, it was a spring called Cadimackie Spring, which was just behind the distillery, and there was hard water. Now we're using the spring water from a spring called Cranit Spring, which is just a few hundred meters from the distillery, and will be pumped up from the spring. It's still a bit on the hard side. It's not 100% neutral water. It's a bit on the hard side. And compared to River Spey, where it's boreholes and where it's neutral water, the water there will be different. But when we talk about water, recent studies have told us that the water is not really that important. Of course, you need water to production. You need the water to be clean, and there has to be a lot of it, of course, for production. But doing distillation and maturation over many years, the effect on the water disappears a little bit. If we were only making new make spirit, then the water would make a difference. But over a maturation of 12, 18, or even 50 years, the water doesn't give a high enough percentage of flavors and to make a difference that we can measure it. So, but again, putting all these factors together, the shape and size of the stills, the barley, the weather, the water, it all makes a difference, of course. But there's a big difference between Spey water boreholes and the water we use in Orkney. But we can only measure the importance when we talk about our new make spirit. And Scotch Whisky Research Institute did an experiment some years back, and there was a good report coming out and it was only measured in the New Make Spirit, where they took water from different areas in Scotland and distilled with that in the process, where they changed the normal water from the distillery to water from a different place. It was not a huge difference, but there were small differences in the New Make Spirit. But again, over maturation period, that might change. So yeah.
All right. So the next question comes from Alan. This might be a good segue to your next product. We'll wait and see. But he was asking if you don't like a peaty or smoky Scotch, what would you recommend?
Well, then of course I would recommend Macallan, which is following up, because that's Macallan do make a few peated whiskey, but it's not what they make, as a core range normally. And I think if you want to have a whiskey that's very clean in the palate, but with lots and lots of fruitiness and quality in it, then Macallan is the right choice. If you want to discover a little bit peatiness, but are not the ones that wants to go into the heavily peated ones like Lafroig or Ardbeg, like Lagavulin and so on, then Highland Park is a pretty good jump. We are not one of the most peated ones. Our core range, when we talk about this ppm level, we are down to about 8 ppm in our New Make Spirit, and then over the years of maturation, we come down to about 2 to 4 ppm, where we can talk about Lafroig, Lagavulin, and so on. That's in the New Make Spirit about 20-25 ppm, so much higher ppm value when we talk about the smokiness and the peatiness. So we are a little bit different, but we always measure as a peated whiskey because we're using peat. But I would say a good introduction to whiskey, and especially with Macallan, a good introduction to single malt, but also a good introduction to a whiskey that you will be able to enjoy even though you've been drinking whiskey for 50 years. That's what Macallan is all about as well. So
great. Well, did you have another tasting for us? I don't want to take up all your time with some of these questions if you've got another.
No, but Shannon, what do you want me to present? Let me hear. Mark, any specific whiskeys you want me to talk about? Full volume, Twisted Tattoo. I have them all here, and I'm just waiting for you to tell me what to enjoy.
You can move on to the 18-year-old. How about we give the 18-year-old a whirl?
Yeah, well, the 18, as I just mentioned, the 18-year-old, one of the most award-winning whiskies in Scotland, matured again in European oak sherry cask, and a much higher proportion of first fill fresh sherry cask than the 12-year-old. We're talking about 45 to 50% first fill sherry. And some of the flavors you get in the 18-year-old is more kind of marzipan, nuttiness, orange peel. There's a beautiful touch of coconut just before it breaks over to the light honey peat that comes at the end. And if you ask me, and I'm not saying this because I'm working for Highland Park, but for me, the Highland Park 18 is one of the best whiskies ever to be produced. Before I started working for Highland Park, I was working at a hotel in Scotland just next to Macallan called the Craigallach Hotel. And I was the bar manager or the whiskey manager there. And I think I was the only whiskey manager in Scotland that had the same malt of the month for 4 months in a row, and that was Highland Park 18, simply because I loved it. And I never changed. Highland Park 18 for me is one of the greatest whiskies that's ever been produced, and still today. And this is actually what I have in this glass here. This is the 18-year-old, and I truly enjoy it every day. So, and I know you have that on the shelves as well, Mark. One that the whole industry still refers to when they make tasting notes. They always put it up to there. We have whiskey clubs that have that as a reference to everything else they taste. Either it's good or it's not as good as Highland Park 18-year-old. And the good thing is that there's not many whiskies on the good side of Highland Park 18. Most of the whiskies are actually on the negative side of that. So it is a really, really good whiskey. Highland Park 18 is one that I enjoy. I wouldn't say every day, but a couple of times a week, I find the 18-year-old and enjoy it. And it is a fantastic dram. And again, natural color, beautiful. And one we started producing when we reached our 200 years anniversary in 1998, and never looked back. It's been the same ever since. So very happy.
Martin, how about one other one we just got recently here in New Hampshire that people are talking about, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier. That's the single cask series, our True North that we got in.
Yeah, well, see, with single cask, it's always like it's not about skills, and that's what I love about single cask. This is where the cask have delivered a lot of flavors. I think we have about 270 bottles there of the single cask, something like that. And this is where you get a unique flavor that you'll never be able to get again. And I remember when we selected the this cask here, it was one of these moments where Gordon and I look at each other, and then there's just a wee smile coming on our faces, and then we just nod, and that just means this is good. And single cask will always be selected by Gordon or myself because it has something unique to offer. And for this one, you have the north there. You get a beautiful amount of nuttiness. There's at the end there's this beautiful smoke coming out, a little bit better than in our core range. And of course, it's always cask. Now I can't remember the full strength, but it's 50, 58 or something like that. Is that true, Mark? It's up there where it really kicks. Can't remember the 100%, but it's normally cask strength, and you'll get the full attention of the whiskey. It's like going into you have it, Mark?
122.
Yeah. So it's like going into a warehouse. Take the bung off the cask and simply just start drinking from the cask, which is not easy, I can tell you. But if you've never been to a warehouse, buy a single cask, buy Highland Park. You'll get the best experience by that. Non-chill filtered, no coloring again, just straight from the cask into the bottle. So beautiful whiskies.
Awesome. So I don't know if you have the bottles right there with you, but Jeff on Zoom was asking if you could hold up the 18 next to the 12.
Yes, I'll just bring it here. See?
Martin, can you talk a little bit about the bottle design on these?
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, well, as we are with the Highland Park is part of this Viking heritage we have in Orkney, we decided to change our bottles a few years back. And as the Vikings, most of them came from Norway, we decided to find our way into the can we say deep rivers of Norway. And when you do that up north, you come to a stave church in a small place called Urnes. And Urnes have it's the oldest Viking stave church they have there. And on the walls outside, they have a carving, a big wooden kind of plate sitting outside. which tells the story about the good and evil. And if you look at it, if you ever go in and you find these bottles and you see the, don't know if I have the carton here, but it's the fight between a lion and a serpent, where the lion is the good and the serpent is the evil. And I actually did a tasting the other day, and a gentleman asked me, what's the story about the dog on the box? And I said, the dog on the box? Yeah, all Highland Park have a dog on the box. And I said, no, that's a lion. And I know what he refers to, because it looks like a greyhound dog, but it's in fact a lion. And you have to remember, the Vikings never made it to Africa, and they never saw a lion. So they only knew how a lion looked like from tales, and that's how they imagined how it looked like. So the whole story about our new packaging, or the packaging we have now, is going back to the true heritage of the Vikings in Norway, where it all began for the Viking heritage we have with the Norwegian guys and the Danish guys coming to Orkney. And what more Vikingish could it be, like taking the first stave church, the Viking stave church, and take one of the most amazing carvings and well-known carvings there and put it on our bottle. And they are very, very proud of it in Norway too. They say that Highland Park is the best Norwegian whiskey in the world, which is fantastic. So we like that. So a good story to tell on our bottles as well. A little bit of Vikingish. That's why we have we do call our whiskeys Viking Honor and Viking Pride as well, just to give it a little bit background to the story. So 18-year-old is also called Viking Pride, and 12-year-old Viking Honor, and very proud of our heritage. Yeah.
Great. All right. Looks like we just have a few more. Does every expression in your lineup have some portion from a sherry cask? Barry wants to know from Zoom.
Yes, in our core range. So when we talk about our 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 18-year-old, Dragon Legend, 25, and so on, every single bottle there will have sherry cask in it, either refill cask, American oak sherry, or European oak sherry. But when we make our special editions, like the Viking Legends, we are using bourbon cask as well. We're using, for instance, going back to a late one we had, Fire, we were using port wine cask. We have the Twisted Tattoo, like this one here. Twisted Tattoo was Spanish wine cask, Rioja cask we are using here. And we have the full volume, which was 100% American oak bourbon cask. So we do tend in special editions to move away from our comfort zone and do something else. And it's good fun to play around with. But every single SKU we have in our core range will always contain sherry casks. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, there are a few more questions.
Yeah.
Well, let me see if we want to, let's see. So we've got someone by the name of Kathleen. How long has the Magnus, Valknut, and Valkyrie been aged?
Oh, it's what we call non-age statement whiskey. So I could tell you, but you promise not to tell anyone. If it's one of these secrets we can't really tell. But when it comes to Magnus, which was only for North America, we were only using American oak cask there, and it was matured for a bit over, let's say, over our youngest core range whiskey, which is 10-year-old, as I just mentioned. When it comes to Valkyrie, Valknut, and Valfather, it's a little bit different because we, as I said before, they all have a higher ppm, and we didn't start that production until about 8-9 years ago. So there will be some young whiskies in there, but there will also be some very old whiskies to kind of lift it up and get a better kind of drinking age on it. So it might have been that we're using some 8-year-old whiskey in Valkyrie, but we're also using some 21 years old, just to kind of shaping it out. And that was to be able to use some of the peated ones because we didn't have old peated whiskey with that high ppm. So yeah, but good question. Yeah.
They're trying to get all the secrets from you.
Yeah, they're welcome. So.
Well, thank you, Martin. We should probably pass it over to Jeremy in just a moment. Let him introduce us to the world of Macallan. But before we get there, I just want to talk a little bit about our 90 Days Around the World promotion that we're running right now. So we're offering all of our viewers during these events of introducing great brands like Macallan and Highland Park, the chance to win some really great prizes. So the grand prize in our 90 Days Around the World promotion offers someone the chance to build their own at-home bar. So that's going to be with a $2,500 gift card to the New Hampshire Liquor and Wine Outlets, as well as some one-on-one guidance from our team of experts, just to be sure that you pick all the right products for your bar. So entering for a chance to win is super simple. You just need to head to your app store on your Android or Apple device and download the Scavify app. And that's spelled Scavify. And essentially, you're going to earn points for every event that you join with us, like tonight. And you're going to enter a code word that we will include in each event. So you're definitely going to want to be sure to stick around and listen for that. Tonight's code word for tonight's event is Macallan 12. Again, tonight's code word is Macallan 12. And so the more points that you earn, the bigger the prizes that you'll be entered to win. So not only is there a $2,500 gift card, but there's various other gift cards available to win as well. So on that note, Jeremy, I'll pass it off to you to get started and we can talk a little bit about Macallan.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Martin. Fantastic job. I know you're coming at us right around bedtime for most of us.
Yeah, well, it's midnight now, yeah.
It was great to hear all the wonderful things happening over there at Highland Park, one of the most beautiful places on earth as far as I'm concerned. So thanks.
Yeah,
again.
it's amazing.
Hey, everybody, I'm Jeremy. I have worked for the Macallan for over 12 years, and I live just south of most of you in Connecticut. But tonight, we're going to get into a little presentation because I have so many pretty pictures that I'd love to share with everyone so that you can really see what's happening there at the Mcallen Estate. Also, I just wanted to go over just a couple of things that maybe Martin didn't touch upon as far as some Whiskey 101 stuff. So before I get into the presentation, I think some of you might be sharing a wee dram with us at home. At least I hope you are. We're about to get hit by a big snowstorm, so hopefully you've stocked up on your whiskey to keep you warm over the next few days. But I get asked this question constantly. I'm sure Martin gets asked this question constantly. And the question is, what's the best way to drink your whiskey? And I'm sure if you ask that question to 50 people, you're going to hear 50 different opinions. So the only opinion I'm going to give you is mine. And it certainly isn't the last opinion in the world. Okay. But I think the best way to drink a single malt whiskey or pretty much any whiskey is out of one of these. This is a Glencairn Glass. These, to me, capture the nose and the color of the whiskey just right. Now, if at home you don't happen to have these Glencairn glasses, they're pretty easy to find. You can find them probably at your local shop or online. A rocks glass is fantastic. A rocks glass will hold the nose without opening the whiskey up too much, which is something that I'm concerned with when I see anyone drinking whiskey out of one of these or out of a brandy snifter, which also encourages you to do this, which is to warm your spirit. In this case, it would be great if you were drinking brandy, but you don't want to do that with whiskey. And mostly because if you drink out of a wine glass, it's going to open up the alcohol a little too much. So like in a wine glass, what's the first thing you do when you drink a wine? They tell you to swirl. They say, swirl it up, swirl it up. And people think what you're doing when you're swirling is actually aerating, but that's not completely accurate. You are aerating it, but you can aerate it just by letting it sit there. What you're doing when you're swirling the glass is creating friction in the glass that helps the alcohol separate from the wine, and the aromas are in the alcohol. You need to work for it because it's so low in alcohol. A wine, you're dealing with 15% alcohol. Everything we're going to be drinking tonight is at least 43% alcohol. So if you put it in a wine glass or you swirl it too much and you stick your nose in, all you'll smell is burning. So we would like it if you could smell the incredible aromas associated with all of the whiskeys. And I think the best way to do it, you saw Martin earlier, he was doing some swirling, and he was doing that really, one, because Martin's a professional and he's been doing this a long time and he can differentiate between the alcohol aromas and everything else we're trying to seek out. But also he was trying to show off the beautiful color with Highland Park. For anyone, I think, newer to whiskey, I would say no need to swirl. If you need to swirl to maybe take a look at the color, yeah, go nice and slow, get a nice waft, and you're going to get plenty of aroma just by holding it right here and inhaling. Now, that being said, the next question that I always get asked is, do you ever drink your whiskey on the rocks? The answer is absolutely. Summertime, I love whiskey. I drink whiskey. That's my drink. So summertime, I'll have a 12-year-old Macallan. Highland Park 18, for some reason, for me, always works great with one ice cube. Don't ask me why, but that's the way that I've grown to love it. You're going to meet a lot of folks that will tell you only add 8 drops of water, maybe from the River Spey. And that's fine too. Adding a hint of water to your whiskey will open up some of the aromas and flavors, and by dropping down the alcohol by volume, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. What I like to do when I'm whiskey nerding, which is what I like to call what we're doing tonight, is first I try it neat, then I try it with just a few drops of water. Nothing crazy. And then I'll have another sip and I'll take a mental note. Did I like this one with or without that little addition of water? And if I'm looking for something very refreshing, I will drink it on the rocks. I'm not going to put a lot of rocks on a very expensive whiskey. That's kind of silly. Keep it for the folks who on the younger yeared whiskeys, 12, 15 maximum. Unless you really like a Macallan 25 on the rocks, then God bless you. I'm not going to take that away from you. As far as the whiskey stones go, not my thing. I don't think they make the whiskey cold enough. I like, if I want it, I do want a little ice in there. But again, these are only my opinions. I may be right or wrong. Enjoy it any way you like it is the point I'm trying to get to. Now, that being said, I am going to move over for a moment to share my screen. It may take me a moment to find the exact presentation, but I will hopefully find it very quickly. Here we go. And just if somebody on the panel can shout out to me that we're good to go on that. Cool. So we're sharing. Fantastic. Great. So welcome to the Macallan. Let's see if we can move it forward without too many issues, or you may just have to be looking at my mug for the rest of the night. Shannon, is it moving forward? No, of course not. It worked perfectly well in the dry run. Let's try it just one more time, and then we will choose to 86 it, as they say in showbiz. All right, one more shot, and if it doesn't work, no problem. I love to chat. So, great. One more try here, guys. All right. Seems to be working. Fantastic. Thank you, Mark. So guys, we started with a little Whiskey 101. Let's take it a little bit deeper now into Whiskey 102 with a very simple question. What is whiskey? Whiskey is a word used to define a brown spirit aged in an oak cask and derived from a grain. The word whiskey comes from the Gaelic term uskiba, which means the water of life. So just know tonight, you're drinking the water of life. If you get pulled over by the cops after drinking the water of life and you tell the cops that, hey man, I wasn't drinking whiskey, I was drinking the water of life, you will still go to jail. So just know this is very serious business. And the kind of grain, the kind of whiskey you make really depended on what kind of grain you happen to have a lot of in the part of the world you lived in. So in America, for instance, we had a lot of corn. So we made mostly corn-based spirits. And in Scotland, they had a lot of barley. So you had mostly barley-based spirits. The simple definition of a single malt is malted barley-based spirit from one distillery. And that's what the single in single malt means. A lot of people think it means single cask or single something else, but really it means single distillery. That means all of the spirit was made and mixed in one place. In the case of Scotland, we have several different whiskey making regions. Martin spoke to us about Orkney, and I know Orkney technically gets thrown into the Highland region, but I like to simplify it. I don't think it's quite as complicated as, say, French or Italian wine regions, where the government really comes in and says, you know, you can only grow this grape on this plot of land, et cetera, et cetera. If you're from an island in Scotland, most likely you will be peaty or smoky. And when you talk about peat and smoke in reference to Scotch whiskey, it means pretty much exactly the same thing. That means, as Martin alluded to, that peat was literally used in the making of the whiskey, and the residual flavors of that peat remain in the flavor of the whiskey today. Most whiskey made in Scotland is from the Highlands and a sub-region of the Highlands called Speyside. And I'd say 75% of the whiskeys made in Scotland are not smoky or peaty at all. So if you're drinking the Macallan and you taste smoke, odds are you're drinking a Macallan that's from the 1940s, and I am very envious of you, because everything that most people get to try from the Macallan is not smoky or peaty at all. And all of it is made in Speyside. Speyside is where you will find the Mcallen Estate, which is what we love to refer to as our spiritual home. It's a functioning estate. It's a 1700 Jacobean manor house founded in 1824 is what a place that all of you can go visit. This is where I live and work when I go to live on the at the distillery. And we have folks living on the estate year round. We have our own proprietary strain of barley that we cultivate and use in some of our limited release whiskeys. And of course, we have the Spey River right in the backyard where we can go fly fishing all day long with a nice bottle of Macallan right off the shore. I've never caught a fish in the Spey River, but I have stood in it with many a whiskeys, casting all day long, and feel like maybe I had just as good of an experience without actually catching anything. I don't know anybody who's ever caught anything. So there at the Mackallon Estate is where you will find the smallest stills in Speyside. And these lie in our new state-of-the-art, brilliant, beautiful, sustainable distillery. Now, we shifted our stills from our old still house. We created new stills in this new visitors center and distillery, but we kept them small. So they're about 12 and a half feet tall. And what that does, I saw a question earlier, why are they all copper? Well, copper, one is great for heat. It conducts heat very well. And it also gives flavor to the new make spirit and ultimately to the final whiskey. The smaller the still, the thicker, more rich and oily the mouthfeel of the whiskey will be. Think heavy cream versus skim milk. If you have a very tall still, if you wanted to just use one example, and there are millions of, I'm sorry, not millions, but many different Scotch whiskey companies that might brag about how tall their stills are. And that's great. That's the way they want their whiskey to taste. There's nothing wrong with that. But the taller the still, the thinner the mouthfeel of the whiskey will be. It won't quite coat and stick to your flavor receptors quite as well as a thick, rich, oily whiskey from a small still. Most vodkas, for instance, use what's called a coffee still. And we all know most vodkas are going to give you a rather thin mouthfeel on your whiskey. The smaller the still, the thicker, more rich and oily, and in this case, also fruitier flavors that will come off of the copper still. Now, from that still, we only use about 16% of what comes off of it. Now, that's called, in our language, the finest cut. Most companies will use around 25% of what comes off the still. As I'm sure you know, we have the heads, the tails, and we have the center, the heart of the run. The heart is where the best spirit comes from. And the Macallan uses one of the finest cuts, which means the most selective 16% of new make spirit coming off of our stills. Now, if there's anything that I want you to take away from our chat today at all, it is the importance of our oak casks. The Macallan and at Edrington, which also includes Highland Park, we spend more money on quality oak than every Scotch whiskey company in Scotland combined. Now, that is on quality, not quantity. You know, we spend about $1,400 per cask before we put whiskey in them. And I'm going to stop my share very quickly just to tell you guys a story about why is that so important. Well, about 80% of our final flavor and 100% of our color comes naturally from our oak casks. So having the absolute best oak is essential to the spirit. In fact, if you like any aged spirit, you're kind of telling me that you like the flavor of the oak it was aged in. That's how important oak is. And for us, the selection of our trees that gets used to create our casks couldn't be more hands-on. You might see a commercial someday for a company, and it has a DeSoto assembly line of oak casks. that seems to go on forever, and gas flames very dramatically shooting down from the sky. And they might tell you, down here in flavor country, we make our own oak barrels. That, to me, cannot lend to exceptional flavor. Everything we do at the Macallan is 100% natural, including the fire we toast our casks over. We hand select each tree. I've done it. I'm sure Martin's done it. We go for a walk in the forests of northern Spain with our master of wood, a guy named Stuart McPherson, and 5 little guys named Mo. That's how selective it is. We go for this walk. We see a 100-year-old oak in the forests of northern Spain, and we put an X on it. It has to have a very straight trunk. And a few days later, those same 5 guys come up and they take the tree down. We want a good 100-year-old oak that's very long and tall. We do take those older trees because we need to thin the herd, if you will, on our oak trees in these ancient forests. The taller trees steal sunlight from younger trees. So when we take a tall tree, those younger trees can get more sunlight and grow. And that's what keeps the forest sustainable. So then we take that tree down to a bodega to process it using saws that you probably had in shop class in high school. All these pictures are on my Facebook at Jeremy Edrington, if you ever want to take a look at them. And we then turn those trees into staves. We hand stack the staves where they will air dry in the forests of northern and southern Spain for a total of 2 years. Why do we do that? Well, the slower you dry them, naturally, the more flavor and it will capture. The sugars won't escape as quickly, and it will capture the flavors necessary for our final product. So after that 2 years, we then turn them into oak casks. We lightly toast them over a natural oak flame using shavings from the oak from those forests. Then we toast it just to get the sugars going, and then we add dry Oloroso sherry wine to them. Now, the wine will season and flavor the cask for another 2 or 3 years before we finally tap it, send it up to Scotland, and put Scotch whiskey in it, where it will rest in our warehouses at the Macallan for any number of years before we finally bottle it, ship it around the world, and send it to you. So if there's absolutely anything that I'd like for you to take away from today, when we talk about the Macallan and when we talk about Highland Park, is our oak casks are the most precious in the Scotch whiskey world. So once we finally get those casks up to speed, filled with that new make spirit from our curiously small stills, we let them rest. When over the course of that aging process, it will start to take on its own unique color. Every single cask is going to have a different color to it. And there's literally no guarantee a whiskey will give off naturally, a cask will give off color at all. You might look at a 40, 50-year-old whiskey that's been sitting in a cask for 40, 50 years, and it's light. It doesn't necessarily age dark. The consumer believes darker is older and better, so we try to make our older whiskeys. We try to choose casks that have a darker hue to appeal to them. But the reality of the situation is that you could have a 70-year-old Macallan pulled right out of a cask that's almost as clear as vodka. Now, most other companies will take that spirit and add artificial caramel coloring to it. We don't do that at the Macallan. We don't do it at Highland Park. And that is crazy. It's crazy because if you imagine that not only do we have to make the whiskey taste the same every time we make it, but we have to make it look the same every time we make it. So our master whiskey makers are constantly putting together cask combinations that will create a consistent flavor and color. There is not a computer that can do it as well yet. I know Martin's developing one as we speak. And finally, That leads us to our final pillar, which is Peerless Spirit. It doesn't take a lot of Google searches to find out where the Macallan lies these days in the luxury world. We are light years ahead of everyone in terms of collectability. Last year, we sold a 60-year-old Macallan from 1926 for $1.9 million. That was a single bottle. And I think that the Macallan's dedication to quality is what puts us in that echelon of luxury and collectability. I've spent time with these folks and had a few whiskeys with them, these whiskey collectors that collect things of that level. And I've always been incredibly impressed with their knowledge. They know way more about whiskey than I know. And I'm so pleased that these bottles for $1 million go to folks who have a love of whiskey, unparalleled, and a pretty big bank account. But I think what's most important was that these guys, when I asked them, what is it? Why Macallan? And they'll tell you, it is our dedication to quality. It is the finest ingredients with the finest whiskey makers that make the Macallan the Macallan. And if you have one more moment, I would love to show you the people of the Macallan. These folks are in charge of our visitor center, our fishing gilly, who loves to cast all day long, and our beautiful new state-of-the-art distillery at the Mcallen Estate. These are places that you could come visit. If you are in the area, please let us know. We'll get you a VIP tour. Just find us and let us know that you're at this tasting, and we'll do our best for you once the world returns to normal. So hopefully you have before you a whiskey. If you have the Double Cask 12, that would be phenomenal. We're going to walk through just a handful of selections here for you to think about this holiday season. The Double Cask 12 is the newer selection from the Macallan line. Our traditional spirit, which you might be familiar with, is the Macallan Sherry Oak line, which comes in at 12, 18, 25, 30, and all the way up to 72-year-old. The Double Cask line started with the Macallan Double Cask 12. The reason why it's a little bit different is, as I spoke of earlier, the Sherry Oak line from the Macallan uses European Sherry Oak casks exclusively. The Double Cask 12 uses American and European Sherry Oak casks, which means we still hand select a an American oak, then we ship it to Spain, where it will be processed, seasoned, and the cask will be created and then finally sent up to Scotland. American oak will give you more vanilla, citrus, honey notes. It's a little bit sweeter than the traditional Macallan, whereas the European oak will give you a little bit more chocolate, cinnamon, tannin notes. So that combination of American and European oak casks really sweeten and create a very lively, bright spirit. As you can see from these tasting notes, I think this is a whiskey that I don't need to tell you why it's great. You put it to your mouth and right away you get it, and it's lovely. The next whiskey I'd love to just chat about, and you're very lucky to have this up in New Hampshire. This is the Macallan Triple Cask 15, which has officially been, we no longer have it in the portfolio. So the Triple Cask 15 will very soon be a very collectible item. The Triple Cask 15 is unique because in this case, we're using American bourbon, American sherry, and Spanish sherry oak casks. Now, we don't ever move the whiskey from cask to cask to cask. So when I talk about double cask or triple cask, we're not saying that we have the whiskey in this cask for 5 years, this cask for 5 years, and this cask for 5 years. We're not saying that we have this cask for 10 years and this one for 5 years. We age all three styles in three different casks for at least 15 years, and then we mix it together. It's still a single malt. It's all malted barley-based spirit, but now with the triple cask, we're using American bourbon, American sherry, and Spanish sherry oak. Little bit sweeter, very light, very bright, great at the beginning of a meal. Believe it or not, this is the whiskey that I always have on my table for the holidays because it is a great little sipper in between all these fatty side dishes that we always have at Thanksgiving and Christmas. I absolutely love it. I will miss it. If you can get it, go grab it now. The Macallan Rare Cask. The Macallan Rare Cask is from just the top 1% of what's called first fill sherry oak casks aging at the Mcallen Estate. Now, we didn't talk about that too much, what first fill, second fill, third fill, fourth fill, fifth fill means. There's about 50 years of flavor on a good oak cask. From that 50 years, the Macallan usually uses first about 80% first fill, 20% second fill casks in our core line. The best flavor comes from the very beginning of the flavor life of the oak. Think about a tea bag, right? The more you use it, less flavor it has. Same thing with an oak cask. So the best flavor comes from the beginning, but the rare cask, we're using all first fill sherry oak casks, the most expensive casks in the Scotch whiskey world. And I believe that this whiskey is what we are trying to do right at the Macallan all the time. Its bright ruby red color is extremely difficult to achieve naturally on a Scotch whiskey. It really doesn't look like anything else out there. And its flavor is long, sweet, very satisfying for the holidays. It comes in a beautiful box that has a gorgeous presentation, and I can't tell you how much people will appreciate seeing that one around the holidays. And finally, just to touch upon, and then we'll answer some questions, the new edition number 6 from the Macallan. This is the final edition in the edition series from the Macallan. The edition started about 6 years ago with edition number 1, which sold for about $85, and now is available for about $5,000 on the internet, if you can ever find one. So talk about affordable collectability. People want to buy 2 of these because they want one for the cellar and one to drink. So if you find it, grab it. This is the final edition in the edition series, and it is celebrating the Spey River, our beautiful water source behind the Mcallen Estate. Edition 1 celebrated our master whiskey maker at the time, a gentleman by the name of Bob Delgarno. Edition 2 celebrated, was created by the Roca brothers, who currently own chef and sommelier at one of the world's #1 restaurants, Cellar de Can Roca. They have a great show on Amazon. If you happen to put on the Roca brothers and see their show on Amazon. Edition 3 was created by a guy named Roja Dove, who is our aroma specialist at the Macallan, and who's also the world's leading perfumier. And edition 5 celebrated our natural color, and the folks at Pantone created a color for the Macallan. And now edition 6, the final edition, celebrating the mighty River Spey. So I hope you enjoyed those wee bits of information. There's plenty more to talk about. I hope I can answer your questions. If not, then I will just say, hey, Martin, do you know the answer to that one? but I will certainly do my best to answer. I know you guys really know your stuff. So Shannon, do you want to take it
Yeah,
from here?
definitely. Yeah, so we actually have Josh on our Zoom chat. He wants to know why Macallan chose to call itself a Highland single malt on the bottle rather than a Speyside.
Well, you know what? I don't think technically Speyside in the old definitions was a region. I believe it was the Highlands. And just because probably at some point someone thought it was a good idea to differentiate Speyside from the rest of the Highlands, some people started doing it. But it's really Highlands, Lowlands, and then Speyside is technically a sub-region of the Highlands. And just there's so many distilleries there that, and the reason, Martin was asked this question about water and how the Spey contributes to these many, many distilleries. The fact is that most of these distilleries that have been around for a few hundred years started as barley farms. They were barley farmers, and they had, just like every other farm that you probably have around New Hampshire, they had livestock and they had barley. Here in Connecticut, I live on a corn farm. So in my backyard, there's corn. And they had barley. And what do you need if you have a good farm? You need water. You need water to keep everything going. So all of these distilleries they weren't distilleries to start, they were farms. But then they learned how to make this byproduct of their barley crop called Uskiba, new make spirit. And they learned how to do it. So all of a sudden they started to have stills. And then they started to use the product coming off of those stills for a cure-all. Hey, it's cold out, have a wee dram. Oh, hey, I got a toothache, have a wee dram. And then they started to trade with it. And they said, hey, I'll take a couple barrels of your hay, I'll take some hay from you and I'll give you some whiskey, things like that. And then the King of England found out about it and started to tax all these guys. And the folks over at Highland Park have some great stories about avoiding taxes. So it was really a happy accident that brought us to the Spey River. It wasn't so much that we needed to be there for the flavor of the water as much as it was these farms once upon a time needed a water source. And now, of course, so does distilleries, which is what most of those farms have turned into. So that was long-winded. I tend to do that, but the answer to your question is technically it is a Highland malt.
Can I just jump in, Jeremy? Because it's as you mentioned yourself, with the taxation and so on. When the Wash Act came out in 1823, Macallan was one of the first distilleries to get the license after the new Wash Act in 1823. But the regions was not divided into whiskey regions as we know them today, where we talk about flavors. They were all divided into taxation. So the lowland paid much more tax than the Highlands because they were closer to England. The Highlands paid a little bit less tax, and the islands didn't pay tax at all for the first 3 years, basically because one of the guys that were in the government at that time said, why should we pay tax? We drink everything ourselves. And the government said, well, fair enough. So they didn't pay tax for the first 2 or 3 years. But Speyside came in later as a region where when it came in as a region, it was said that to be a Speyside distillery, you needed to get water from either River Spey or the By Rivers. That was kind of where Speyside came in. And today, in fact, only 1 or 2 distilleries, where Macallan is one of them, will get the water from River Spey, and Macallan is the only one in Speyside, more or less, that will not call themselves a Speyside distillery, because, as you say, Jeremy, originally they were a Highland distillery. And that's all about tradition.
I think it's like, when real estate brokers learned to call a neighborhood Soho or Boho, it was just became a thing.
It's a very long explanation but I think Macallan just kept it because of traditions, and fair enough, because that's actually what they, as you say, rightfully, what they are. They are a Highland distillery. Yeah.
Shannon,
Yes.
moderator extraordinaire.
Well, you have a very great radio voice, so I feel like you should be the moderator in this entire.
You know, but you're so charming. I think you should do it, because look at you. You're you need to be doing this more often if you're not doing it enough.
So we have a question from Stephen on Zoom regarding the 15. I believe it was the triple cask, and what will be replacing that in the lineup.
Well, there will be a double cask 15 available in New Hampshire at some point. The double cask 15 is sherry oak from America and Spain without the bourbon oak influence.
Great. All right. So we also have another question regarding the soil profile used to grow the barley for Macallan. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Wow, that's a very in 12 years, I've never been asked that question. That's incredible. Wow. That's a first. I'm going to have to write that one down and send some letters to find out what the answer is. You know, the vast majority of barley that most distilleries use is sourced from farms in southern Scotland. So, you know, there's so many factors that go into play there. For our core line at Macallan, we are sourcing our barley from those farms, and we'll use some of our proprietary barley. And then for some of our limited releases, like the Mcallen Estate, for instance, the Mcallen Estate's using all proprietary barley, which comes from the farm, and it is a dramatically different whiskey than every other Macallan, in my opinion. It really brings the barley forward. It's one that I would, if I were teaching a class, I would use as an example of where the barley lay in the flavor of the whiskey, because it took me a little while to find barley in, say, Macallan 12. And once I identified it, and you know, after 12 years, I'm still continuing to learn new things about this stuff. I never lost it, but some people have a hard time tasting the barley or tasting the corn in a whiskey, but it's there. It just lingers in the back. I call it the base note of the spirit. So as far as I don't know what you know, I think you're putting it maybe in wine terms, because that, you know, the soil will affect the flavor of a grape, but I just, it's not anything that's ever come up in any of the conversations I've had, but now I have something new to learn. So thank you so much.
All right. So Daniel on our Zoom chat is interested in what your personal favorite offering is for Macallan.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. It's tough because I've had Macallan, like 70-year-old Macallan, pulled out of the cask at the Macallen Estate. So that's, if you say, what's your favorite? I'd say, well, it's got to be that one, right? I will always, I love the additions. The Macallan M, Reflection 6 are exquisite bottles that, you know, might be more available. I think you guys have them up in New Hampshire. The 6 and M, I think, are a bit of a yin and yang. They're a perfect brother and sister to one another, equal in quality, but different in flavor. The Macallan Reflection uses small hogsheads casks, which is rare in the Macallan line. I think I'll miss the triple cask 15. I cannot answer that question. I think the best thing about Macallan is that I'm always in the mood for it. There are some whiskeys that I, maybe in the dead of January, when that Christmas is over, we've taken down the lights and the brisk winds of New England are starting to hit us, and I'm building a fire and I go, ooh, I'm in the mood for that super smoky whiskey. But Macallan is a whiskey that I can drink in the summer, I could drink in the winter, I could drink all year round and always love. So I guess the answer to your question is Macallan.
I think you got yourself out of that one.
I can't tell you. I mean, I get asked that question from time to time, and it's very difficult to answer because there's only one Macallan. Let me put it to you this way. There's only one Macallan I've ever had that I didn't like. And I'm not going to tell you which one it is, but we don't make it anymore. So sometimes it's like if you know somebody and you go, geez, I think that guy is kind of a jerk. And then all of a sudden, maybe he gets let go of the company, and then you find out, oh, everybody else thought he was a jerk too. I guess that's good. So I carried with this whiskey, it just never sat with me. And then all of a sudden, one year we discontinued it, and I thought, that's fantastic. Good. I don't need to talk about that one anymore. But everything we do is surprising every time we do it with the additions. I'm constantly surprised. We're always innovating. We're always changing the game, and we're leading. So I think it's hard because they're all good.
It's actually a really awesome segue because Paul on our Zoom chat is looking to see what new expressions you have kind of coming down the pipeline right now.
There are some expressions coming. I'm not clear as to, what their availability will be in New Hampshire. I'm at some point, but there's a Distill Your World London that is coming soon that was developed again with a partnership by the Roca brothers. The greatest chefs and restaurateurs in the world got together and made a whiskey that they wanted to drink. And it's pretty hard to argue with those guys. There's some exceptional single cask being released this year as well. If you're not familiar with that line, those are, as Martin said earlier, they are single cask spirits, which is as close as you can get to going to the distillery and pouring a dram right from the wine thief. So whenever you find or have an opportunity for one of those, grab them. There's a few coming out this year. And, the Macallan Fine and Rare always has some limited release. I know that there's a 91 available up in New Hampshire. And those, when they come, it's always a surprise even to us what the distillery releases from year to year. But, as I'm sure you all know, just like in the movie business, a lot of things have been put on hold until we figure out exactly, what's happening. And I think just like in the movie business, there's going to be a number of blockbusters coming out as soon as everybody could get back in the theaters.
Awesome.
Jeremy, can I jump in and ask you a question?
Of course.
You mentioned when you were talking, and I know your background being a bartender and in the world of restaurants, and you talked about in between courses before. And, this 90-day program is in light of not being able to do our Spirits Week and our Distiller Showcase of Premium Spirits. And when we were putting this project together, I actually got lucky enough to travel down to Philadelphia and attend their whiskey event down there to try to glean some information about how they did their event and grow ours. And I was lucky enough to hook up with the representative down there from Macallan, and we got to go out to a very high-end steakhouse after the event, and we did a 6 or 7 course meal with a pairing with Macallan in each flight of that meal. And I think, not to talk down about wine, everybody thinks, wine is great. I enjoy a good glass of wine and pairs well with food, but I don't think people understand the concept of a brand like Macallan and the different offerings, how they can pair incredibly with food and itself. So if you could talk about that a little bit, that would be awesome. I was blown away by the experience.
I'd love to. I'd like to put things in wine terms because I think that people get it. And if you really want to make it simple, if you were to put my Macallan whiskey into wine terms. Anything from the Macallan that says sherry oak will tend to pair similarly to a red wine if you're pairing at home with food. That being said, I don't think any whiskey, and I might be wrong, pairs well with anything tomato based. So where that doesn't work is that you always think, well, I'm having spaghetti, and so I need a big Chianti. I don't think it pairs. It's too much acid to pair well with a whiskey. But if you're looking at steaks, roasts, anything chocolatey, anything nutty, is going to pair very well with a sherry oak whiskey. Whereas that triple cask 15 to me is a bit more like an oaky Chard or even a bright Sauvignon Blanc. And the reason why I love white wine with my Thanksgiving or my Christmas is because, believe it or not, wine works as a great palate cleanser between each side dish. And with Thanksgiving or Christmas, you have so many side dishes that sometimes they all kind of turn into what my wife and I call flavor black. It's just kind of this mushy, nondescript, wonderful thing, right? But it's not super distinctive. So you have to have a little sip of bright wine to cleanse your palate in between each side dish. Now, I found that using the triple cask 15 did something very similar, and it's just little tastes. They also, you could take that same theory and pair the Macallan with cheese very well, and go down to your favorite cheese shop and pick the brain of the guy at the cheese shop and say, I've got these whiskeys and I'd love to have some socially distanced friends over at some point, and be able to speak to them. Well, if you use that little rule of thumb that I gave you, the sherry oaks pair like a red, and the triple casks pair like a white, you'll be pretty good. And don't try anything with spaghetti and meatballs. Now, I'm an Italian from Connecticut, so I'd love to find a whiskey that paired well with spaghetti and meatballs, but it's just not going to happen. Maybe a really cheap whiskey with some pizza at 3 a.m, but that's about it. And don't be afraid to explore. I think part of the fun of whiskey, and similarly to wine, I think what excited me about wine when I first started working in spirits and wine was that when you're tasting it, you're going off to that place. It tastes great, but you're also experiencing the flavor of the place, the terroir. And whiskey can do that to you. It can transport you to that place. I think having a variety of whiskeys at your disposal is a luxury that I have, that Martin has, that some of you may have. But it's always good to have maybe one or two from each region to satisfy, your cravings at that particular time. And when you're pairing with food, I found that the Macallan Sherry Oak 12 pairs phenomenally with General Tso's chicken. I mean, something very surprising. Some great Indian dishes, these dishes that are kind of off the beaten path from our traditional steak pairings. Sushi, for instance, with the triple cask is phenomenal. And of course, Highland Park with clams or oysters and some great seafood will really, really shine. So have fun with it. Anything else?
Awesome. All right. So Michelle on Zoom is actually curious what current offering most closely resembles the original Macallan.
What is the original Macallan? That's the original Macallan. Well, there was a guy named Macallan once, and I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, you'd have to go back to maybe the 1920s to get as close have a fine and rare for $1 million, and that would be the closest to whatever was happening in 1824. That would it. I mean, honestly, we get to try a lot of different whiskeys when you work with a master whiskey maker in the lab. I know that there's sample dating back a couple hundred years for nosing references. They're not going to drink it, but they might pull out a little bit to nose. It's if you were to even say, the Macallan 12 Sherry Oak might come close, it would be a reach, because there's really no way of knowing other than in 1824, they weren't losing any sleep over aging. The phenomenon of aging is really a modern phenomenon. People didn't live that long, and anything over 3 years is like, what are you waiting for? Drink it, man. What's wrong with you? It was really, in the 70s and 80s when single malts needed to differentiate themselves from blends, that they started to explore the possibilities of aging, that age statements started to become prevalent. But even, as Martin was speaking to, like, non-age statement whiskeys, in my opinion, there's plenty of non-age statement whiskeys that are just as good as any aged whiskey. So I wish I knew the answer to that question. If I could go back in time, I would see Jimi Hendrix play at Woodstock, and then I would leap back a little further to 1824 to try a Macallan.
Oh, we've got another pairing question. Pete is asking, I'm not sure if you're a smoker or not, but any suggestions on cigars that pair exceptionally well?
I am not a smoker, and I'm sorry to say, and the reason why I'm not a smoker is because I like smoking too much. So there was a point probably 15, 20 years ago that I realized, oh, I like this too much. I have to calm down on this. I'm not the person to ask on that one, and I think probably you're going to get a great answer from whatever cigar club you might frequent, and chat with the folks there and say, I've got this Macallan Sherry Oak. It's got some chocolate, cinnamon, nutmeg. It's very robust, big flavors. I think with cigars, you do want whiskeys that can hold up to the strong flavors of a whiskey, right? So if you're going for a lighter whiskey, you'd probably want a lighter cigar. And if you want a robust cigar, you'd probably want a robust whiskey. But I remember in those days of smoking cigars with whiskey, and I would tend to think that younger whiskeys pair better with cigars, because those very old whiskeys are so subtle that you might lose them. And just like with pairing with food, you wouldn't want to put Tabasco on your filet mignon. You don't want to over flavor whatever you're pairing it with and lose. It's all about balance, right? So I might ask you that question. You tell me.
I don't think I would score well, because I am a fan of the A1 sauce on any cut of meat. So
nothing. Hey, eat it any way you like it. My brother only eats steak well done, and I look at him like he's crazy every single time, but he doesn't care.
So before we wrap it up, I do want to announce the winners of our two $250 New Hampshire Liquor and Wine Outlet gift cards, as well as some Macallan and Highland Park glasses. So our two winners tonight are Paul DeChesney and Jen Orr. So I will be reaching out to the both of you via email over the next day or so, and we will get your address so we can get you your gift cards and your new glasses. So
Shannon, if I could.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to take a second to thank Martin and Jeremy and let everybody know watching on Zoom and on Facebook that they only touched a little bit on what we offer here in New Hampshire. We're lucky enough to work with the Martinetti Group here in New Hampshire that works directly with these suppliers. And if you go on our website, liquorandwineoutlets.com, you can see the wide range of products that we offer. And, fair to say that we have one of the best collections in New England, if not on the Eastern Seaboard. So again, Martin and Jeremy did a great job touching on their whiskey portfolios and giving us a little one-on-one on Scotch whiskey. But please go on the website, take a look at all the offerings we have from these great whiskeys. It's a perfect time to go out and buy something for yourself and for family and friends for the holidays. And we really appreciate Martin and Jeremy taking the time. And again, our friends at Martinetti from getting us all these products that we can offer to our consumers in New Hampshire. So thank you guys very much for taking the time tonight.
Thank you. And Martin, go get some rest.
Yeah, well, it's only 1 o'clock at night, so but, now I just put myself at dram, so I might be up a little bit more. So
all right, let's do another one in a couple hours, okay?
Yeah. Well, no, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and good to see you, Jeremy, as well. Hopefully, this soon will be over, and you and I can catch up in Scotland at Macallan.
I can't wait.
So, yeah.
Can't wait. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great night.
And see you all in Orkney in not so long, yeah? If you can make it over there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin and Jeremy. Super awesome presentation. I'm so happy you were both able to take the time to join us tonight. Thanks, Mark, for providing your insight and sharing your story about that food pairing. I think we have a few people in our Zoom chat a little bit jealous. So for those of you that are still watching, if you enjoyed tonight's event, please be sure to pre-register on our 90daysaroundtheworld.com website for future events, so you can be entered to win exclusive prizes from all of our guests and rack up additional points in your 90 days passport. Again, the code word for tonight's event is Macallan12. We have a great handful of events coming to you in the next few weeks. We've got a tasting with Bailey's Irish Cream Liqueur, as well as Moet Champagne. So be sure to check our 90daysaroundtheworld.com site to find out which events you'd like to attend and pre-register for them. So if you have any further questions for Martin and Jeremy, please don't hesitate to reach out on Facebook, and we will do our best to get them all answered for you. So thanks again, Martin and Jeremy, Mark. It's been so much fun. Have a great night, everyone.
Oh, good.